Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Pisgah Podcast.
We are your hosts, Drew and Mangler, and we are coming to you live from the end of the never-ending road.
You may have heard that this road doesn't end, but guess what?
We're at the end of it.
And Drew, just like that, we're through the end of 2020.
Yeah, so just like 2020, this road goes on forever. It's got some sucky spots, but it's also got some cool spots.
Yeah, and similar to almost every year, there's going to be some ups and downs. Granted, most everyone has some major negative 2020 experiences, but there are definitely some positive experiences in 2020. So instead of doing some sort of New Year's resolution BS, let's look at some positive experiences we had in 2020 and how to bring those into 2021 better. So Drew, kick us off. What was a 2020 experience you had that you would incorporate into 2021 in a positive way?
So it's probably not necessarily one experience, but just something that kept presenting itself to me. Things in 2020 really seemed to drag out. Even some rides, some events, availability of things like rotors and other consumable bike parts. It's kind of reminded me that no matter how bad you want something to be done and over with, rushing through it and taking shortcuts just won't make it over with sooner. And often it just makes it longer and worse. So in 2021, I'm going to embrace the things that get drawn out. And I'm going to use that time to smell the roses and really take that time to reflect and remember to use it for a better experience next time. How about you, Mangler?
I go back to the early spring when a lot of the shutdown stuff started happening, when, quote, Pisgah closed. Essentially, basically what the Forest Service did was they closed a lot of the access points of people to get into the forest. But if you were local, you kind of knew how to navigate your way through the forest. So when it came to getting into ride stuff, yeah, you might have had to go all the way up Black Mountain Trail to access something, or, going up through Squirrel Gap to get over to Black Mountain Trail. Things were harder, but they taught you to look at them in a different way. So that's kind of how I'm looking at 2021. Things may be harder, but it's going to not force you, but it's going to allow you to look at things differently and figure out a different way to do things. So, there are plenty of times where going up Black Mountain Trail really sucked, but it was something different. And I think that's what a lot of us needed, was something a little different. I had fun doing a lot of that stuff. It was a little more adventurous, made a cool bike packing trip out of doing a loop like that, and had a great time. So it's stuff like that I'm going to carry into 2021.
If I remember correctly, on doing one of these difficult to access rides during the shutdown in the springtime is when we kind of hatched the idea to do this show.
You're right. Yeah, we were deep in Pisgah on a navigational route ride, and we kind of spurred up the conversation on starting a show like this.
And here we are, 7 episodes in.
The 2020 pandemic brought us the Pisgah Podcast, kind of.
And with this podcast, and with the theme of the past few episodes, harping on the fact that it's winter and it's pretty cold right now, it's a good segue into our guest for this week.
Yeah, so Drew and I tossed around the idea of bringing on someone to talk more official than us when it came to winter bike care. So yeah, let's roll that tape. So Sean, welcome to the show. If you could introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Sean Mulliken. I'm the owner and head mechanic at Find Your Line Bikes in West Asheville. Specialize in high-end service, and been riding bikes for a little over 20 years at this point, and been a professional mechanic for 15.
So let me ask you this. A lot of people will say, I've been riding bikes for X amount of years. To me, when I think about when I started riding bikes, that's when I took training wheels off. How do you equate yours?
I guess mine was more whenever I started to see it as a distinct hobby, something that I was more interested in and had some level of prowess with, So growing up, like everybody has bikes and rides to a certain degree, at least where I grew up at. It wasn't until I started riding mountain bikes, that I considered myself a bike rider. Started doing that, around 13. Once I started riding bikes, I just never put one down. It's kind of the start of the rest of my life.
I think that's how most of us go. It's just the start of the rest of your life.
Sure.
I know the feeling, yeah. I always kind of equate, obviously, like Mangler said, when you take your training wheels off. But for me, the measure of it for myself is just when I became obsessed with looking at magazines, and I'd look at the pictures in the magazines, and I could pick out every single component on a person's bike, and I knew then that's when I was definitively, that's how I describe myself as a bike rider.
Another way I've kind of described it to people is like, the first time I propped a board up on a brick to jump with my bike was...
Yeah.
That's a good metric.
Yeah. Sean, thanks for being on the show today. We are in winter right now. North Carolina can have some blistering temperatures that can surprise us. And most of us have fairly expensive bikes, and we want to take care of those bikes. And it takes people like yourself to help us do that. So for our listeners and for Drew and myself, we wanted to bring you on the show and kind of give us some good information on how to best care and maintain our bikes for wintertime.
We've been on the topic of winter in the past couple of episodes here, and talking about what we can wear and what we can do to better winterize ourselves. So obviously it's time to talk about what we can do for our bike and take care of it. So what are some common issues that a bike experiences that would be the result of exposure to cold temperatures?
So the biggest things that I see are going to be fluid-based, whether it be moisture or suspension fluids or brake fluids. Those are the things that whenever it gets cold, everything starts to kind of constrict, get harder, that is going to be more difficult to work. So one of the common complaints we get is dropper posts stop working whenever it gets cold. Well, usually it's one or another component within that system that fails. Most of the time it has to do more with the actuator or lever than anything.
Would that be because of something like the reverb that uses a fluid-based actuator?
Sure. So both types are going to have distinct problems, and I've experienced both of them myself. The reverb is more common because most people don't want to deal with their own brake bleeds and hydraulic systems, so that tends to get overlooked by a lot of home mechanics. And what happens is you'll get a small air bubble in there. It'll work well whenever it's warm. Everything is expanded, normal temperatures, and there's still enough pressure for that lever to push enough fluid to open the actuator and the post itself. Well, whenever it gets cold enough, everything condenses, even that fluid is going to constrict a little bit, as well as those air bubbles in there, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough pressure. There was always an issue going along, but the cold really brings it out, and then all of a sudden your dropper fails. Well, really it's the lever that's causing that issue. On the other side of that, the other style of an actuator would be like a cable and housing system, like what everybody is comfortable with shifting and formally brakes, and what I have experienced personally worse issues with a cable and housing system than I have with a hydraulic system, because what will happen, and it's especially bad around here because it's so wet, generally cold temperatures in winter, it's still going to be very moist out there. So what happens is you drive to the trail, you get snowed or rained on, it drops below freezing, that water gets inside of the housing, freezes the cable. More than once I've went to hit my dropper post, and I've got enough leverage to pull that cable through the housing, but it's too frozen to slide back through. So then all of a sudden you've got an actuator on the post that's completely stuck open, and the post just goes up and down because the cable and housing is frozen. Those are, you got to be fairly, extreme cold to do that, but it's happened, several occasions in this area.
Yeah, I've had something like that happen with me before, where I was driving up, and part of my route to get to where we were going was on the parkway. And so like my seat post was up during the drive, and I get there and my dropper post is frozen. And what I ended up doing was leaving my vehicle running and keeping my bike upside down and let it sit, my dropper post, right at the exhaust of the van. So I was able to thaw it out. So cool. There's a little pro tip for you to thaw out your dropper post.
There you go.
Sit up by your exhaust.
Except for that corrosive exhaust and what it's going to do to your anodized components.
Yeah, there's that.
We're talking short term here, Drew.
Got to get that right in.
One thing that stood out about what you just said, especially with the hydraulic actuator, and even somewhat to do with the cable system, is that those problems did exist before They're just
Right.
kind of exacerbated by the cold. So
Yeah.
honestly, just good old-fashioned preventative maintenance is one of the best things you could do there, huh?
Oh, 100%. And all the issues that we're likely to talk about this evening, would be prevented, with that maintenance on the front end. It really doesn't get cold enough here to really cause major issues with the bicycle, enough that you're going to have some performance, reduction, and then, like we're talking, if there are any maintenance issues, it's going to exacerbate those problems, But even whenever it gets down into the single digits, bikes are made to work, and they're still going to work in those conditions. So this area doesn't get quite cold enough to make, severe component differences.
It's obvious that indoor bike storage is preferred, especially in the
Hmm.
winter. But for those that may not have a choice but to store their bike in like their shed or cold garage, what can they do to help prevent temperature-related issues in that sort of scenario?
As long as it's a dry garage, I got no problems with people storing their bikes in the cold. The only thing that it's going to do is, again, bring out those underlying issues possibly sooner. If it is not a heated garage, it's not a good way to stabilize the temperature on a bicycle. I would not suggest putting heaters directly in front of a bike. That can open up a whole other host of problems without really solving one. The big issue, with storage in the cold is just making sure everything is dry. Like as long as it's not getting moisture on it and causing it to freeze and thaw. And that goes with the bike itself. Like trying not to put up a wet or muddy bike into an area that's going to freeze. Because that freeze thaw on the bike, if there's enough mud on it, can cause issues as well.
I mean, it's just like the trails.
Sure.
Water and dirt get inside little crevices and they freeze and expand. It can cause
Yep.
issues.
Yep. Every time.
But what would be common misconceptions about how bike operates differently in the winter versus the summer? But it kind of sounds like you really just kind of spoke to that point already.
Yeah, because most people are going to expect some issues, or just not expecting full performance in the winter. But that's the biggest thing is you're just going to have a lack of that last absolute amount of performance out of the bike. All your seals are going to be colder and harder. Nothing will slide as well. Your suspension will be, a little bit handicapped because of that. Braking power is going to be a little bit down. Foam hardens. The comfort of the bicycle will reduce, as well as grip on the handlebars. So the majority is the just don't assume the bike is going to work as optimally as it does, in the fall and summer and on the fair weather days. But yeah, just a drop in performance is the biggest thing to expect in the winter.
It sounds like some points you were hitting on earlier are very obviously fluid or moisture related. And I know personally that just like the rocks in Pisgah do after a nice warm night and a cold morning, they'll draw moisture and condense
Yep.
and things like that. So, as far as component selection, is there a good enough argument for carbon versus aluminum in certain situations because of a situation like that happening, perhaps?
I don't think so in this area. Maybe in some more extreme northern environments, there'd be a better argument for that. That's exactly the point that I kind of written down on that was the condensation. The only material that I would have any concerns with on that would be steel. If properly treated, with a frame-saving liquid on the inside, I wouldn't even worry about that. But the condensation steel would be the only material that I would be concerned about. As far as between aluminum and carbon, I don't think there would be any measurable, advantage, to running one over the other just due to temperature.
As far as component failures,
Hmm.
do you think there any that are mostly a result of cold weather riding? And are there any pro tips for limiting these?
A little. One of the interesting failures I had a few years back, shortly after I moved to Asheville, was just right as dropper posts were becoming very popular, and went on a night ride with a buddy, and it started, in the evening, went into the night, so the temperature dropped. So it went from running through mud puddles and getting mud and splash on the bike to that freezing. And not taking into account the fact that I had frozen mud all over the dropper post as I used it throughout that ride, I ended up damaging the seal in the dropper post. That particular post, the fluid was not separate from the main can, so it started dumping its fluid out through the upper seal head. Being aware, of the conditions and how they change, throughout the ride can help prevent some damage like that. Suspension, anything that slides is going to be prone to that mud getting on there and freezing. And if it freezes hard enough, once it's forced past that seal, it can very much damage a seal. So, there's potential suspension and dropper failures for that. Outside of that, kind of the things we've touched on before, those potential issues that just get exacerbated by the cold, would be the other thing that I would think would be the main failures that you'll see.
There seems to be a theme here, and the word dropper post keeps getting mentioned a lot.
Sure.
It seems that like those are kind of a little bit on the problematic side when it comes to temperature swings.
A little, and I think dropper posts they've kind of gotten a bad rap over the last few years, is it's a new product, relatively speaking to the mountain bike world, and it takes a lot of the performance of a suspension product and shrinks it down to this tiny, tiny little package. It's very sensitive because everything is so small and requires, so much consistency and strength to it that small differences, can cause problems. In the last, I would say 2 to 3 years, we've started to see that go away a lot, as far as reliability things go. The fluid and air systems are fully separated now. The majority of posts, even if you did blow a seal, you're not going to lose function out of it. So I think a lot of that is just coming down to dropper posts kind of growing up and kind of coming into their own. They'll be more reliable over the years, but it's still a tiny package, that's holding a ton of performance and just something that's, some of that stuff inside of there is, it's not any bigger than your thumb. Like it's really small tubing, seals, things like that, holding lots and lots of pressure.
Yeah, we are asking a lot out of that one piece
Yeah.
to perform, to do what it does, for sure.
Yeah, for a long time. And a lot of people don't think that dropper posts require maintenance like suspension products, so I see people run them and say that with a badge of pride. Oh, well, I've never had to rebuild it. It's 3 years old. And then it fails and we get in it and it's like, well, man, like, this is going to require more in replacement parts than the post is worth. People will run them to failure, and they take maintenance like everything else. To perform well and to have any kind of life span to them, still got to be maintained.
An interesting test I would like to research or possibly perform is to see on a basic like middle black loop, maybe a squirrel loop, because you have some traversing in there. What gets more full, like in and out, your fork or your dropper post?
I would say the dropper post. I tell people all the time that the few people that haven't gone to a dropper yet, like I use my dropper lever more than my shifter. Like I am constantly moving my seat. Even on climbs, often I'll drop my seat a certain amount to get my center of gravity where I want it to do the steepest of climbs. It's just one of those
some of
things.
those steep like ups,
Yep.
you might have to like drop your seat because you need to do like, a bunny hop move or something.
Totally. Or just need to center your gravity lower to keep the front wheel down and still traction.
Or even just to get it between your knees to where you can use some body English to make things happen too.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I use my dropper constantly.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The last episode, or an episode or two ago, we touched on things that people can wear to be comfortable on the bike and in the cold. And I was wondering if you also had any tips for the bike driver and not just the bike.
Main things, normal layering concepts I think everybody's pretty familiar with now. I'm a huge fan of wool, natural fabrics. I've pretty much switched over to that exclusively for riding in this area. I think some of the things that some people overlook or try to overdo a bit in the winter is too many clothes, and then you start to lose dexterity, so you don't have as much control, over your hand or body position. And also, as you start to layer under something that's kind of snug, you start to lose circulation. And regardless of how much insulation you have, if you're not circulating well, you're not ever going to be warm. And I see that mostly with shoes and gloves, the extremity thing that people try to layer underneath. And they're using their summer shoes to put on big, thick winter socks or multiple layer socks. And then all of a sudden you don't have as much circulation. And regardless of the insulation, you're always going to be cold if your blood's not circulating well. So I think, stuff like that, those, dexterity and circulation things are stuff that get overlooked a bit, whenever trying to layer for a good comfort in the winter.
As far as the shoes go, that's why I invested in some good actually riding boots,
Mm-hmm.
so that I don't have to try to cram my foot in my summer
Like,
shoe with winter socks or shower pass socks or whatever. I've got room in that boot to where I don't have to wear a thick sock. So I don't lose that circulation in my feet, because that's what I experienced. And I was like, you know what? I'm investing in good boots, and it's been a good investment.
yeah, whenever I got my first pair of winter boots a few years ago, I couldn't believe it took me that long to get a pair. They were so much better, through the cold months, that I couldn't believe it took me that many years to finally bite the bullet and get a pair of winter shoes.
What are your winter shoes?
Well, right now it's just a pair of 510s laced loosely. But whenever I was riding clipless, I had specific winter boots, and they were just the specialized, whatever their winter shoe was. And just a high top clipless shoe with the extra insulation. And made a big difference. I do find that I stay warmer now that I've gone to flats. It's more of a traditional shoe fit, so it's easier to put the appropriate thickness socks in there without losing circulation. I always like my clipless shoes to run on the small side because it didn't look like any movement inside of the shoe. It's a little bit different fit for me with flats. I have found that I'm able to stay warm enough with standard flat shoes than at least for the amount that I'm riding in the winter these days.
Yeah, I think around here too, that's very fair. I've had some clipless winter shoes in the past, and they're not generous with the toe box, and
Yeah.
pretty much any clipless shoe that I've ever had, much less the winter ones where you want it the most.
Yeah, I'm fortunate because I have a narrow foot, so the specialized defrosters that I use have a, plenty of room for me in the toe box. But the first pair I bought, I did have to send back because I felt they were too small. Sean, what are some of the other? Is there anything else you feel like you think you can add on to this?
The only thing that I would say is that maintenance is higher in the winter. For the majority of the reason is going to be just the additional moisture around. Being a rainforest here, it's wet all the time, but especially so through the winter. It's very rare that you're going to go on a full ride and not get into the mud and grit somewhere. So everything is going to wear at an accelerated rate through these months. Just due to the fact of it staying moist. And whenever you do ride after freeze thaws, you get all the worst of the grit, that gets splashed up into your bike. So, that just acts like a sandpaper, through anything that moves. So just being more diligent on watching your stuff, not waiting until your brake pads are at the backing plate, like not waiting until the suspension bits are dumping oil out the seals, just staying on top of it and knowing that those little intervals are going to hit sooner, through the winter, harsher months.
For those listeners who may not be as familiar with Western North Carolina or Pisgah National Forest, this area, what is it about this area that is so tough on bikes?
I'd say the biggest thing is the rocks and conversely the rock material in the dirt. So I don't know enough about dirt to kind of break down what all is in there, but it's a very gritty dirt. So whenever it gets into stuff, it's got the tendency to abrade away everything. The roots, rocks, sharp edges. Like this, in my opinion, is one of the best places in the world to ride bikes. It's one of the worst places to be a bike. Yeah, it is. It is hard on bicycles around here. Like we do a lot of carbon repair here, and the types and amount of breaks that we see, just from regular trail riding in this area, it's weekly. We see just crazy broken bikes, just from normal trail rides. So yeah, it is hard on bikes in this area, but the rocks are the hardest thing, both in their solid form and their dust form.
What's some of the best just riding along stories that you can share with us from a customer bringing in a bike that's just obliterated and they were just riding along?
I get pretty good information out of folks at this point. Anybody that has come by trying to take that approach, I've generally gotten the story out of them.
Or you've already heard it through the rumor.
Sure, yeah. The rumor mill goes pretty fast.
Instagram tells the tales too.
I guess it was last year, maybe the year before, right after they had redone the section of Upper Black down to the intersection of Avery. There's a couple of pretty good jumps down in there. And I had a customer come in after that and had broken his wheel into 3 places.
Oh.
So I guess he was coming down, and one of those jumps on the right-hand side, about 2/3 of the way down, there's kind of a rock hump. And if you don't make it and you come up short, you hit this rock hump.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yep. And he did that, squared off on it, had an appropriate, downhill all-mountain tire on there, cush core, and a all-mountain wheel. Broke it in 3 different places. And thought he could just hike out to the road and catch a ride. Gravel was closed. Had to hike out to the road, hike all the way back to the parking lot, and finally got out. So not so much of just riding along, but that was one of my favorite stories of the last year or so.
So speaking about wheels and you just brought up cush core, let's take that back to the winter. Do you see that people tend to need to run more or less air pressure or different compound tires when it gets cold around here?
I think most of that comes down to how picky and discernible you are. Tires are going to be stiffer, in the winter, so a slightly lower amount of air pressure is going to bring back some of that suppleness. Not all of it, just due to the fact of a rubber hardening. As far as the grip, no amount of air pressure difference is going to give you that suppleness back in the rubber itself. But slightly less air pressure will help. For the most part, I hesitate suggesting folks to run less pressure. Most people are prone to run too little anyway.
Guilty.
So, yeah, sure. So I generally don't suggest running less pressure, but it is something that I will bring up to folks that they're going to notice the tire suppleness is going to change a bit. And kind of the same thing with suspension. The suppleness is going to change, but I wouldn't really try to offset that with pressure.
For wintertime, a lot of times I will switch to a max grip tire in the front. I find that helps a lot in the wintertime when everything's a lot more slippery and wetter.
Yeah, totally, man. That softer durometer definitely would. It'd be harder for the temperature to affect it. It's going to affect it, probably affect it a little more, but it would be still softer after it hardens. And, with the wetness, then, that soft rubber makes a difference.
And then I'll forget it's on there, and then I'll go to Sedona for a winter vacation and then just, eat it up to Sureheads.
Last 5 days. Yeah, dude.
Sidewalls.
The one time I went out there, brand new set of tires, lasted a week.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I actually run narrower tires when I go to the desert just because exposed sidewalls just tend to get nuked.
Oh,
yeah,
sliced
good point.
up. So I'll go back to 2.4s and stuff like that when I go out there.
That's funny that's narrow now.
Yeah, no.
When you said narrow, I thought you were going to say a 2.3, but I was I guess
I mean, hell, a 2.3 by a lot of manufacturers is still pretty big tire.
Still pretty big. Yeah.
I mean, I'm running a 2.4 on my rear and a 2.6 on the front right now.
Yeah.
Still keeping it old school. 2.35s all around.
Sean, what's your bike setup?
Tire setups, Magic Mary up front, snakeskin, soft compound, and on the rear I run the Rock Razor with a super gravity casing and soft rubber compound on that as well. And I'll run that setup year round.
I do like the Rock Razor. I've ran it in the Pacific Northwest, mostly British Columbia. Mm-hmm. I've enjoyed that tire up there a good amount.
Yeah, man. It's been my favorite by far. I like the Minion SS as well. I would consider that a fairly equivalent. Mm-hmm. But I've still not gotten a tire that's made me want to take the Magic Mary off for any extended period of time.
What bike are you riding?
I've got a Transition Patrol, heavily modified.
Has it had some carbon repair processes on it?
Carbon repair and some carbon fab. So of course, I crash my bike about every time I ride it. So it's had a couple of repair jobs from bouncing it off of rocks. And one of the things, whenever I got that bike, before I even got the frame, I was set on running the Cane Creek double barrel, and so I'd already had the shock by the time I got the bike. Got it all mounted up. Realized the reservoir hits the down tube at full stroke. So ended up cutting out a section of the down tube, fabricating a shelf that drops down and molding that shelf into the down tube itself, so I can run one. It's a longer stroke, double barrel now, and I'm able to get the shock I want on the bike. Which that shock's got a few modifications inside as well, but that's the biggest thing that I've done to the frame so far.
How does that line up with the warranty of that frame?
Definitely would void the warranty on that. Anytime that you take a hole saw to your carbon frame, your warranty's out the window. For me, wasn't really a concern because I'd already
If you break
broken
it, you're going to fix it.
Totally, yeah. I'd already broken it at that point once. If it breaks again, I'm going to fix it anyway. But yes, this is not a condoned activity. So if you're wanting to cut holes in your frame, we'd be happy to help you with it. But make sure it's out of warranty already.
Sign a waiver.
Yeah.
Sean, speaking of brakes, you had a nasty human brake this past year.
I did.
How's recovery been?
It's been a struggle, for as many risks and years as I've ridden, I've never had a real injury. Bunch of stitches, cuts, bruises, things like that, a bunch of concussions, but never anything that kept me off the bike. And so for everybody to know, I went over the bars at Snowshoe on a sizable jump and open fracture of my radius and ulna. So both bones popped out, broke the arm right in half. Pretty major injury, and just being forced to be off the bike for that amount of time has definitely been a struggle. Trying to deal with getting strength back, in the last 6 weeks or so, has been frustrating, just to be still, that weak, after not using it for about 3 months. But being able to be on the bike again and do the rides I was able to do just with a little bit of different approach has been huge coming into winter, being able to get that outlet back again. But losing the outlet of riding a bike with having to deal with an injury on top of it, hard double whammy.
It happens.
So wouldn't suggest it, Make better choices than I did.
Did you overshoot it or did you case it?
Well, I guess more overshoot than anything. So it was one of those things like got to Snowshoe, first run of the day, was just super stoked. Finally gotten out of the shop. We've been super busy and I was just really looking forward to a weekend of riding with the buddies. First tires on the dirt. We were just waiting for the rope to drop. And felt good, and it was just one of those, I was having to hit every jump harder, go faster around every berm, just riding harder and harder the whole way down. And I'm coming over this jump, and I see a rock in the takeoff. And I hit it intentionally, and I was like, if I jump this rock on the takeoff, I'm going to get even higher. And I did, but I just missed it a little bit, and I bumped that rear tire too hard, and it just started to over-rotate me through the air. And because I was in the air for that much longer than what I was really should have been on that size jump, I had more than enough time to go over. And in the air, I never thought I was going down. I knew I was going to crash, but I didn't think I was going to get hurt. I really thought I could set it down and bell it to the ditch. I was like, if I can just get my front wheel on the ground, I can at least get off the trail and into the side of the hill. But front wheel touch, momentum took me over, and it was just instant.
I was really bummed when I heard about it. I was like, oh,
Thanks.
man, because it was like right in prime season.
Oh, dude, yeah. End of July, it was primo riding time.
Any of those, movie frame, when you can think about it while you're in the air and actually crashing kind of things, they it's wild how your brain works when you're going through it all, and how the movie has a different ending than you thought it was going to.
Absolutely. When it all happened, before I even slid to a stop, I knew what had happened. I knew what kind of injury I had. And even at that time, I was like, all right, well, this sucks. So let's just get it over with, and I was able to maintain that attitude for a while. But now looking back on it, it's like, oh, man, I don't want to do that ever again. I don't ever want to see my bone again.
I've seen my bone once, but it was not because it was broken, because of an open laceration.
Oh, wow.
I've witnessed some of that stuff, and it's not something that you want to do again.
No, not at all. Now that I'm on the other side of it, I especially don't want to do it again.
It gives you healthy respect for it, for sure.
It does, and it's one of the things, unfortunately, I haven't learned before now, is that healthy respect, and that's fueled me to be more less risk averse than I should be riding bikes, and I would like to make smarter choices, but I don't really want to lose that, desire to push the limits either. But I want to make some smarter choices.
Yeah, I don't tend to learn my lesson. For
Sure.
some reason, there's not much on my body I haven't broken, and I usually spend 3 months a year off the bike because of it. So
Yeah.
it sucks.
It does.
I'll figure it
Yeah.
out someday.
Well, whenever you do, let me know how.
Yeah.
Send us a group message on that one. 'Cause, yeah. I purposely kind of went to a shorter travel bike to maybe do some risk management a little
Mhm.
bit, but I don't know if it's really done much for that.
The times that I've done that and had that thought as well, it usually doesn't work out so well because once you figure out how that short travel bike rides, you just start doing the same stuff on the
Oh,
shorter travel bike. Yeah,
yeah.
so you just
You just
putting it
feel the
right on that
bottom of it.
knife edge. Yeah.
Sean, we really appreciate your time this evening. Thanks for hopping on the show with us. For those who aren't familiar with Find Your Line Bikes, where are you guys located at? And tell us a little bit more about the shop.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, thanks so much for having me over on. I really appreciate it. We are located at 359 Haywood Road in West Asheville, just a couple doors down from Battle Cat Coffee, for those familiar with the area. Kind of a rider shop. We specialize in maintenance and high-end service. We'll work on any bike in any capacity, but our specialties are going to be suspension work, both maintenance, tuning, and modifications, carbon repair, paint correction, and fresh repaints, and then all the basic maintenance and normal services any other bike shop offers as well.
We'll make sure to include some of that info in our show notes so that listeners can find you guys on the social medias.
Great, man. I really appreciate that.
What were your main takeaway tips from Sean's Winter Tech Tips?
My main takeaway, the thing that I think I was missing the most, is that it seems that moisture is the bigger issue than temperature. And it sounds that even if you have to store your bike in the cold, as long as it's dry, it should cause less issues. Once again, beating the drum that we hear all the time, preventative maintenance is always the best maintenance.
Yeah, 100%. Preventive maintenance, it's something that I personally need to get better at. I am a home mechanic. There are certain things that I definitely reach out to the shops for. Preventive maintenance is something that I need to do. And right now, Chris Regis is probably wondering why I haven't brought my suspension by to him yet. But I'll bring it by there this week, Chris, I promise. Some other takeaways. I don't think people understand how much moisture can affect your bike. We do live in a rainforest, so that's something to take into account.
We do, yeah. Things that are dense and cold tend to attract moisture from the air, and that's just as true for the rocks that we ride over in Pisgah on a nice dewy morning as it is for the metal parts on our bike. And speaking of wet and cold, Mangler, what has our weekly weather ride report got in store?
Man, so this week, it is another not good week. Last week I did say that it was going to be a gravel week, and for the most part, it kind of was, but it did get nice. But this week, man, Thursday and Friday, they are calling for snow in our area, probably at least 6 inches, definitely more on those higher elevation spots. And what that's going to lead us to is a lot of those northern slopes, a lot of those pockets that don't get a lot of sunlight. That snow is just going to hang out there for a little bit over the weekend. The highs are in the low 40s, the lows are getting out in the freezings, and then followed by some more rain and snow showers on Monday. So we'll see how that goes.
We're going to do what we can with it, but I gotta say, my old bones don't really care for the cold as much as I used to.
But that's what we got all that good cold weather gear for, right?
It's true, we have it. I need to use it more.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. As always, you can find us on social media if you just search Pisgah Podcast. And as always, we would love it if you would share, rate, and review us, especially on Apple Podcasts.
And if you are as glad as we are that 2020 is a wrap, then go ahead and subscribe.
Yep, I'm smashing that subscribe button again. So, Drew, when you taking your bike into the shop to get a little tune-up done?
Well, it's halfway apart right now, I guess now.